Hello, our project is over an article titled Wildlife Ecotoxicology of Pesticides. So, pesticides are substances used in agriculture to control unwanted animal or plant life. One example of a pesticide is an insecticide, which limits insect activity. The whole purpose of them is to help the plants that we want to grow to help grow and thrive. Research on pesticides began in the early 1960s, and they kind of just were able to find a link between pesticides and wildlife mortality rates. But since the 1990s, a lot more research has been conducted, and they've been focusing on the effects of pesticides on populations, communities, and ecosystems, as well as how global change has changed the effects of pesticides over time. This research led scientists to find a lot of unintended effects of pesticides on various wildlife. So this graphic kind of just shows an overview of these effects, but specifically on individuals, it caused neurotoxicity, altered metabolism, and immunotoxicity, all very bad things affecting the functioning of the systems of the individual wildlife. All these things lead to bigger effects in populations, communities, and ecosystems, which will all be covered in the upcoming slides.
My slides include the population level effects of pesticides on both populations and individuals. So the populations that are affected will include mammals, reptiles, birds, amphibians, fish, insects, and other invertebrates, along with plants and fungi. Individuals can face their own issues when dealing with these pesticides, which include neurotoxicity and altered metabolism, in which neurotoxicity is a disruption in the nervous system. As for the populations, some common issues that they face are population decline, increased mortality, and mass death. So there are issues that communities and ecosystems face as well. Communities in biology are defined as a blend of multiple species that live in the same geographical environment. An ecosystem is the interactions that organisms in a community share with their environment. So some of the issues that communities are facing include a decline of natural predators, changes in food sources, and changes in plant species, whereas the ecosystems are facing affected nutrient cycles, affected functioning of their ecosystems, along with a decrease in heterogeneity. And something about this is that community effects may lead to ecosystem effects. Basically, an ecosystem is the overall, and communities can overlap with that.
The effects of global change on pesticide consequences. When water temperature and increased atmospheric temperature occur, the change in metabolic patterns in pesticides also increases. So an example of this would be the changes between the temperature interactions with the metabolic rates of heterothermic organisms and the physiological processes in temperature-dependent sex determination. An example of that would be reptiles. And then on top of the changes in the metabolic pattern of pesticides, it causes alterations to biotransformation processes, precipitation, volatilization, and deposition, which can also lead to predicted changes in the geographic range and incidence of infectious diseases that may be fostered by pesticide-exerted immunotoxicity, which all can overall cause massive interference of effects of global change on biodiversity, overall affecting the ecosystem function. An example of this would be the global warming is promoting invasive plant growth, which influences biomass production and nitrogen cycling. So this graph, the green shows what global change is affecting, and the yellow shows us what pesticides and metabolites are affecting. So the global change alters many factors, including the pesticides and metabolites that cause major issues. So global change specifically can change the precipitation and increase warming, which results in pesticides increasing poisoning and diseases/infections that impair and influence populations, as seen in the graph. Pesticides and the growing globe change are posing huge threats to wildlife, and it is important to understand the direct and indirect effects of pesticides and climate change.
So for my section, it is the solutions to microevolution and future research. Microevolutionary processes within microbial communities are able to catch up with the ability to adapt to the selective pressures that pesticides present. There is a resistance, though, in microbial populations, showing their range to recover and develop tolerance over relatively short time frames. The time frames are much shorter as compared to longer generation times of many different animal and plant species of all sorts. So as far as the research that could be conducted, there are many forms of research that could be needed to develop sustainable strategies that will manage the impacts of pesticides effectively. These include long-term ecological studies, which would be conducting long-term studies to assess the persistent effects of pesticides on various ecosystems. Another one would be microbial ecology research, and that would include investigating microbial communities to understand their responses to pesticides and their role in ecosystem recovery. Another one would be non-target species studies. This would be investigating the impact of pesticides on non-target species, including insects, aquatic organisms, and plants. The second to last one would be evolutionary ecology, which would be the study of the evolution of resistance in pest populations and as well as non-target species exposed to pesticides. And the final suggestion would be climate change interactions, which would be investigating how climate change interacts with pesticide effects and considering factors such as temperature, precipitation, and global warming.